Hi everyone. Today we're going to read When Lightning Comes in a Jar. I'm going to be pausing throughout the book to ask you some questions, so be listening. Today is my family reunion. I can hardly wait. My dad's side of the family will come soon. It's been ages since I've seen them all. Before, our reunions were always at my grandma's house, but this year it's going to be at mine. I was so anxious to see my cousins, especially Lydia and Sandy. They'll be wearing the same colors as we always wore at family reunions. They wore them at our last reunion. How I remember that day. Grandma and I stood in the front window, waiting for our relatives to come. I can't wait to see them all, I said to her. I know, she answered. Will there be jello like there always is, I asked. Yes, she answered. And baseball and croquet like there always is? And bag races too? And will you tell stories like you always do? Might, Grandma said, looking up at the sky. And we might catch lightning in a jar. Lightning in a jar, I asked. This was new. And then my relatives started driving up by the carload, one after another. Finally, the car I was waiting for rolled up and my favorite 5 cousins piled out. Sandy, Freddie, Billy, Lydia, and Carl. Sandy and Lydia and I squealed and ran for the porch swing just like we always did. We held hands and pushed the swing with our bare feet. We told secrets that we had kept for a whole year. I told them about the lightning in a jar. When my dad called out, "Who's going to help me unload these baskets from the car?" we shouted, "We will," and we lugged baskets full and heavy to the tables in the maple grove. Wonder how many Jello salads there'll be, my cousin Freddie asked. Gazillions. There always are, my cousin Billy answered. Sure enough, there were gazillions. They jumped and shook every time we bumped the table. They seemed alive. Bet there'll be as many meatloafs too, my brother chimed in. There they were as we unpacked them, zillions of meatloafs. They were all different too. Each auntie had their own recipe, including Auntie Bertha, who made one with hard-boiled eggs in the middle. When we cut it, there was a perfect slice of egg like a giant eye. Our aunties and grandma fiddled around the table like butterflies, going from flower to flower. They perked up the lettuce or rearranged the tomatoes and set the slices of meatloaf so they looked perfect. When Grandma and the aunties took off their aprons, we all knew it was time to gather at the table. We all held hands. Uncle Waylon said the blessing. Then everyone sat down and dove into the food, piling it high on their plates, some as high as haystacks. My brother Richie was sitting with some older girls that came with our older cousins. He was acting silly. I could tell he liked one of them. Embarrassing. We all thought we couldn't eat anymore. Grandma and my aunties put their aprons back on and started getting all the pies and cakes from the kitchen. There was something magical about my grandma and her sisters this day, like they knew something they weren't telling. I did wonder how Grandma was going to catch lightning in a jar. Every so often, I'd stop her and ask her how. She just smiled and said, "Easy, someday you'll do it too." After we ate, it was time for our annual baseball game. My dad and uncles against us kids. "Batter up," my dad called out as Cousin Billy stepped up to home plate. Luckily, he was on our team. He could hit anything. When he was out in the field, he'd leap into the air and make impossible catches. "That kid can jump higher than the cow's back," our uncles used to say. First pitch out, Billy hit the ball so hard it clean disappeared. We thought we saw lightning as it hit the sky. Maybe the lightning was on its way. Was that what Grandma was going to catch in a jar? "I'm going to be a Detroit Tiger someday," Billy said that day. We all knew that he most certainly would. Next, it was my time for croquet, the biggest game of the day, which our uncles kept interrupting with friendly quarrels about bent hoops, crooked wickets, and wanting to take reshots. We had a bag race, watermelon seed spitting contest, and rides on Grandpa's draft horse too, until Grandpa waved a yardstick in the air. All of us kids dropped what we were doing and ran to the milk shed. We knew it was time to get measured. We did it every year. I liked looking at the marks of my grandma and her sisters and brothers on the same doorway, some shorter than mine. Hard to believe that they were little like me. Auntie Bertha had gone to the house and fetched all the family portrait albums. The auntie showed us old brown photos and pointed. This was their father, who saved souls as a circus preacher when he wasn't farming. Look, there were their favorite horses. Their eyes sparkled when they showed us their wedding pictures. The aunties were all married in their mother's parlor. I watched Grandma to see if she would summon the lightning from the sky. It's time for our family photo, Aunt Iva said. And she jumped up and grabbed her camera. We kids didn't like this part because it meant that any dirt on our faces would get scraped off with a hanky that had our auntie's spit on it, especially mine. Everyone smile, Auntie Iva sang out. After this, the kids started to chant, "Stories, stories, stories, please." Grandma and her sisters and brothers stared quietly and slowly. Uncle Ernest told about milking cows faster than lightning. Grandma told us about how she and her sisters walked 7 miles to a one-room schoolhouse over in Lock Center, and how each of them taught in the same school. Then there was some quiet as Aunt Iva started fanning herself. We knew she was getting ready. I remember the day I was driving the rig home from school when I came upon a real rattlesnake. We all looked at one another. Rattlers weren't around these parts, so we knew this was going to be good. That thing was all coiled up and shaking its tail. Not a rattling sound, something more like a loud buzz. Bell horses just stood there and shook. "What did you do, Aunt Iva?" we asked. "Well, sir, I stepped out of the buggy, took off my umbrella, and put it smack in the middle of that coiled up snake. It just wrapped around the umbrella. I knew if it struck me, I was a goner." We all leaned forward. "So I picked it up, gave the umbrella a sharp jerk, and flung the snake into Cecile Potter's field. Then I jumped into my buggy and galloped home, like the wind." All of my aunts and uncles laughed. Then a flicker of heat lightning sprang out of the horizon. The air didn't move. Was some magic going to happen? Aunt Ida flooded her fan. We knew she was getting ready to top Aunt Iva's story. Have I ever told you about the time I took a ride in the first newfangled motor car here in the country? No, we kids sang out. Well, sir, it belonged to Eldie Dunkel. My pa did not approve of him, no, never, no how. He was a wild kid, he'd rave. Don't never want to see you with the likes of him. Then one day when I was walking home from prayer meeting, he rolled up next to me, driving the shiniest machine I'd ever seen. Aunt Ida stopped and fanned some more. "What happened, Aunt Ida?" we begged. "Well," Aunt Ida crowded, "I climbed right into that thing. Eldie shifted that contraption, making a terrible sound, and that road ruster almost leapt right out from under us. It went so fast, my hat blew clean off. We were going almost 40 miles an hour. We raced up Moyer Road, hurtled around Evie Peters' farm, almost flattened the Bender sisters' fruit stand, then howled down Diaz Street." We gasped, and when we skidded to a stop in front of Pa's barn, there he was, just standing there. She stopped again and fanned herself. "What did he do, Aunt Ida?" "What happened?" we all pled. "Not a blessed thing," she answered, and laughed so hard she almost dropped her lemonade. Heat lightning flickered again. There was a low rumble of thunder in the distance. Now I watched my grandmother. She smiled and gave me a wink. It was her turn. Well, sir, Grandma began, I was but a girl, out plowing, helping Pa with the fields. His team could pull those rows straight as an arrow. When the team reared and bolted and dragged me halfway down the field before I could free myself. When I stood up, there was a fierce and clattering roar in the sky above me. We all leaned forward. It was like thunder and fierce lightning. She stopped and sipped her lemonade. What was it, Grandma? The kids begged. I looked up, waiting for the lightning. Well, sir, I couldn't believe what I was seeing above me. We crawled closer to her knee. There, like a dragonfly with two sets of wings, glowing and roaring, pitching and roaring, spewing foul-smelling smoke. She leaned forward. It was the first ever flying machine in the state of Michigan. We all clapped in delight. That would have been the perfect time for lightning to come, but it didn't, and it was almost dark. I whispered to Grandma, what about lightning in a jar? She adjusted her glasses and gave me a look. Have the last rays of sun left the grass, she asked. I looked real hard. Yes, I said. Then sit down, child. Aunt Bertha brought a wicker laundry basket full of glass canning jars and set them at Grandma's feet. Many years ago, when our aunties and uncles and I were but children, our grandpa showed us what I am about to show you. He leaned down and touched the grass, cupping something in her hands. She thought for a moment, then said, shadows lengthen, the day near done. Birds fly low at the setting sun. Stars will rise from the earth below. In these hands, their light will grow. Come up, lightning, come up, stars. We'll snatch you up in here jars. She blew into her hands and let something go. It flew up for a moment and landed deep in the grass. We watched and waited, but nothing happened. Low thunder rumbled above us. Look, my cousin Billy called out. A small burst of starlight puffs up from the grass. Then more and more drifted up from the carpet of the lawn beneath our feet. Fireflies, we all called out. We grabbed the jars and the dash was on to capture lightning bugs and put it in a jar. Grandma gave me a knowing look and smiled. With everyone had gone home for the night, Grandma and I sat on the porch swing together. We looked at the flickering jar, and even though fireflies are common in Michigan on summer nights, we had never seen so many that night. And as long as I live, I believe that somehow Grandma called them up with her stories and her magic. That night seems so long ago, but the reunion is here again. My family is arriving soon. My heart is racing. We'll eat scrumptious jello and meatloaf, play baseball and croquet, spit watermelon seeds, and scrawl new measurements on my milk house door jamb. We'll look at old photo albums. We'll laugh and some of us may cry. We'll remember the stories, how Grandma saw the first flying machine and Aunt Iva conquered the Rattler. We'll talk about Billy and how he should have been a Detroit Tiger, but gave his life for his country in a war far away. Then when the sun is low and the shadows are long, we'll all sit and fan ourselves in the shade of the maple trees. Only a new crop of children would gather at our knees. My father, my grandmother, my aunts, and my uncles were no longer here. So now it was we who must tell their stories and bring them back for fleeting moments. Then I will show the children the magic that Grandma showed me. I'll call the stars from beneath their feet, and as they rise in the warm night air, these children will leap as high as a cow's back to gather them up. I'll send them home with full bellies, tired bones and flickering jars in their lap. Their hearts will be overflowing, full of lightning, put there by folks who loved them even before they were born. Grandma knew this well. She also knew that someday they would tell their children all about us and the magic nights when we caught lightning in a jar. The end.